All these new challenges are bringing together about the biggest restructuring we have ever seen, not just of the global economy, but of the global order as a whole. And 200 years ago, a famous British Foreign Secretary said that the new world had been called into existence to redress the balance of the old. In 1990, another old world ended, dominated by the Cold War, and people talked then, in 1990, of a new world order.
It is somewhat worrying when you discover that so-called crackpot conspiracy theorists were right all along. For years, paranoid people, mainly across the internet, have forewarned us of a new world order or a one-world government. Just yesterday, David Cameron, UK Conservative leader, announced that he would not be giving the British people a referendum on the EU if their party won the next general election, which seems very likely. This comes after just a few months back when he told the public that we would definitely get a referendum. The reason given is that apparently by the time the Conservatives get in power it will be too late to stop it. He changed his stance after the Czech president signed the Lisbon Treaty, which will effectively end the sovereign nations in Europe and over the next few decades produce a European superstate. The Lisbon Treaty is the last nail in the coffin of a long ongoing transfer of national sovereignty to Brussels. The British EU nightmare began in 1973 with the Treaty of Rome, mostly under the guise of a trade agreement. In 1986, the Single European Act was introduced, followed by the Maastricht Treaty in 1992, the Amsterdam Treaty in 1997, and the Treaty of Nice in 2001. These treaties have chipped away at our national states, each one bringing more power to Brussels and ultimately less freedom for the European people. The real agenda has always been a United States of Europe, and the Eurocrats behind the EU have known from the outset that it would not have been possible to simply create a united Europe in a short space of time. Instead, a slow eroding process has taken place, and the game is almost up for the individual nation states. You already have the euro, the state currency, the EU4, the state military, the EU Parliament as a state government, and all it requires to be a fully fledged country are the signatories of our leaders to seal the deal. This was tried in 2005 with the EU Constitution, which was rejected through referendum by France and Holland. Now the Lisbon Treaty is almost active, having had all but a few signatures needed. The Lisbon Treaty incidentally is exactly the same as the 1985 Constitution, only it had referendum written out of the contract, and some of the more vicious aspects removed, such as the EU flag and the anthem being mandatory instead of nation states. It's quite possible that 2010 will be the last year Britain or any other European country exists as its own separate entity. But that's nothing compared with the Copenhagen Treaty, which is being put forward in December this year to all the world leaders. This is a scheme to truly bring about a world government by using climate change as leverage to submit financial and resource control to unelected and unrepresentative figures. In its own words, it states it will create a government, not a governing body, which will close the free market and will give itself the power to interfere with all financial markets in the world. They will then take a 2% cut of every financial transaction in rich countries and give it to a developing country as a carbon debt. It is clear they are using global warming as a scam to get a communist world state. It will not only regulate our lives but determine how successful we are as individuals and how many resources we are entitled to. The world leaders have knowingly been constructing a bridge between capitalism and communism, and they know full well that the huge corporations already have monopolies and that by embracing communism they can forever keep the population relatively poor whilst keeping themselves and their business friends rich, much like any previous communist system. Lord Christopher Monckton, a former science advisor to Margaret Thatcher and a hereditary peer, is leading a crusade against global warming myth and any subsequent treaties. This next video explains it all.
And what are we doing instead? At Copenhagen, this December, weeks away, a treaty will be signed. Your president will sign it. Most of the third world countries will sign it because they think they're going to get money out of it. Most of the left-wing regimes around the world, like the European Union, will rubber stamp it. Virtually nobody won't sign it. I have read that treaty, and what it says is this: that a world government is going to be created. The word government actually appears as the first of three purposes of the new entity. The second purpose is the transfer of wealth from the countries of the West to third world countries in satisfaction of what is called coyly a climate debt, because we've been burning CO2 and they haven't, and we've been screwing up the climate. We haven't been screwing up the climate, but that's the line. And the third purpose of this new entity, this government, is enforcement. How many of you think that the word election or democracy or vote or ballot occurs anywhere in the 200 pages of that treaty? Quite right, it doesn't appear once. So at last, the communists who piled out of the Berlin Wall and into the environmental movement and took over Greenpeace, so that my friends who founded it left within a year because they'd captured it, now the apotheosis is at hand. They are about to impose a communist world government on the world. You have a president who has very strong sympathies with that point of view. He's going to sign. He'll sign anything. He's a Nobel Peace Laureate. Of course he'll sign it. And the trouble is this. If that treaty is signed, your constitution says that it takes precedence over your constitution. And you can't resile from that treaty unless you get the agreement of all the other states parties. And because you'll be the biggest paying country, they're not going to let you out. So, thank you, America. You were the beacon of freedom for the world. It is a privilege merely to stand on this soil of freedom while it is still free. But in the next few weeks, unless you stop it, your president will sign your freedom, your democracy, and your prosperity away forever, and neither you nor any subsequent government you may elect will have any power whatsoever to take it back again. That is how serious it is. I have read the treaty. I've seen this stuff about government and climate debt and enforcement. They are going to do this to you, whether you like it or no. But I think it is here in your great nation, which I so love and I so admire. It is here that perhaps at this 11th hour, at the 59th minute and the 59th second, you will rise up and you will stop your president from signing that dreadful treaty, that purposeless treaty, for there is no problem with the climate, and even if there were, economically speaking, there's nothing we can do about it. So I end by saying to you the words that Winston Churchill addressed to your president in the darkest hour before the dawn of freedom in the Second World War. He quoted from your great poet Longfellow. Sail on, O ship of state. Sail on, O Union, strong and great. Humanity, with all its fears, with all the hopes of future years, is hanging breathless on thy fate. Thank you.
Britain stands at a crossroads. In just a few months we have a general election. I would suggest to all those who want to keep Britain Britain to vote for the British National Party. It does not matter whether you agree with their things on immigration or race or whatever the media has decided to spin. What really matters is preservation of our country. Thank you.